Hello, this is Power in the Word, and I'm Scott Reed. Thanks for joining me for this study session in our Come Follow Me Book of Mormon. Today's lesson being Ether, chapters 1 through 5, and a very unique opportunity today as we get to set aside the large plates of Nephi and take a look at the 24 plates that were found by the people of Limhi in Mosiah 8, 7 through 10, and translated, known as the Book of Ether. There's a lot here, so let's look at these things in our background. You may want to note in your heading as well that about 19% of the Book of Ether will actually be Moroni's own commentary on the book. We know that Ether is its author and that it contained 4 specific things. Here, creation of the world, the creation of Adam, the account of Adam all the way down to the Tower of Babel, and then an account from the Tower of Babel to the destruction of the Jaredites. We know that Mormon had every intention in putting the Book of Ether in the plates. You can see that in Mosiah 28, 17 through 19. But his life fell short due to war and his death. And so this is being left to Moroni to complete. The Book of Ether is very unique in that the 1830 edition is different than our current Book of Mormon. Originally, it was made up of just 6 chapters. You can see I've listed those 6 chapters here. All but one of these chapters began with, "And now I, Moroni." And the 4th sentence in the remaining chapter began with, "And now I, Moroni," emphasizing the central position of Moroni in the preservation and structure of the Book of Ether. Here are those 7 commentaries that Moroni will actually make, and their subject. You can see here he's going to have some things that he wants to be sure to point out concerning the land of promise, brother of Jared's experience as a temple, the mysteries of God and the law of witnesses, the problem with secret combinations, then faith, hope, and charity, and last of all, the New Jerusalem. Note that the Book of Ether covers then about 1,500 years of history. One purpose of the Book of Ether is to serve as a second witness along with that Nephite record, that those who lived in a land of promise, choice above all other lands, must either serve God or be destroyed. So note here is the pattern that we have concerning a witness of 2 nations. Note, you have both peoples being brought by the Lord to a promised land which was choice above all other lands. Jaredites, Nephites. Both groups were led by mighty prophets who saw the Lord. Both people experienced prosperity during times of righteousness. Both testify to the reality of Jesus Christ. Both experience a major division of the people into 2 groups. Both experience great destructions because of wickedness. And last, both destructions were survived by a lone prophet record keeper who was rejected and hunted by his people. So some fascinating correlation between our Nephite civilization and our Jaredite civilization. It's also interesting to note that then the Book of Mormon becomes, through the record of the Jaredites being a second witness, the paramount pattern for the latter days. Now, if I take you into a slide that I've prepared for you so that you can see the Book of Mormon as the paramount pattern for the latter days, you can see here, as I've noted before in 3rd Nephi, that it is the pattern in preparation for the second coming. But when you look at it as a large whole, okay, you'll see, for example, that Lehi and Nephi's experience coincides with that of Joseph Smith Sr. and Joseph Smith Jr., that they are almost a direct pattern of each other. Continuing this idea, we look at next the Book of Mosiah and how it parallels that of Brigham Young's day. We see also that the Book of Alma patterns the time of the first years in the statehood of Utah. So what's next? Well, we come to our day, the parallels that happen in the Book of Helaman seem to parallel our present day. And thus, as 3rd Nephi shows the signs and the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ, so it will also then prepare us for the signs of his second coming. Continuing then, you find Mormon's book, okay, giving a description of the final war and destruction of the nation, is exactly what's going to happen in our day according to the Book of Mormon, ending also in the millennial day and the great destruction of the wicked in a final battle known as the Battle of Armageddon or of Gog and Magog. This then lines up perfectly for us to look at the Book of Ether, which Moroni includes the translation of an earlier nation that existed on this continent, the Jaredite experience exactly the same pattern and cycle as the Nephites do. The book then serves as a complete second witness to our generation and fulfills the requirement of the law of witnesses in 2 Corinthians 13, verse 1. We then conclude with Moroni in our upcoming lessons, who will caution and counsel us for as ones who have inherited his book and his father's book. And then he supplies in closing the ideas of signs and tokens that you might be able to recognize the true church of Jesus Christ. So some fun things looked at. We'll look at this one in a minute. As we go back to our scriptures, we see then this incredible witness that Moroni is going to put in for his father that completely patterns not only the Nephites and what happened to them, but also prepares us and our day. Okay, chapter 1, you can see Moroni is going to tell you that he is abridging the writings of Ether in these verses 1 through 3. It's not absolutely clear in the Book of Mormon whether we have Moroni who made his own abridgment or whether he is taking the abridgment of Mosiah's earlier translation. We're not quite sure there. Okay? But for sure, he is the one that is making the account. When we jump down and start with the account of Ether, verses 6 all the way down. You can see, look at these 30 generations of the people of the Jaredites. As Ether, notice, goes from, its structure goes from backwards, starting with Ether here, all the way down to Jared and his brother. Okay? See, look at all these people, and then we end up with Jared and his brother in verse 33. But notice, in chiastic structure fashion, it then turns and records each individual, these 30 generations, in historical narrative. Further evidence that those who wrote this record were not only sufficient, but proficient in the techniques of Hebrew poetry. So, here's our turn, and we start with verse 33, Jared then coming forth with his brother and their families from the great tower. You may want to underline this. This is the Tower of Babel. Here's your Genesis cross-reference, Genesis 11, 4 through 9, about the Tower of Babel. In fact, let's take a quick note that here in verse 4, we see that a city and a tower is being built. An interesting insight, notice, as we come down to its name here in verse 9 of Babel, that the Lord will confound the language of all the earth, and he will scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. An important note might be for you to know that we must not fall into the old vice of reading into the scriptures something that is not there. There is nothing said in our text about every man suddenly speaking a new language. We are told in the book of Ether that languages were confounded with and by the confounding or the mixing up or the scattering of the people. That confound, also used in the book of Ether, is meant to have its true and proper meaning of to pour together or to mix up together, is clear from the prophecy in Ether 13:8. The word here meaning mixed up with other people, culturally, linguistically, or otherwise. The confounding of languages is related to the mixing or the confounding of different peoples in creating this great tower in Babylon. From such a mixing of people who were attempting to build a counterfeit temple, that's the tower mentioned there in verse 4, to the heavens, Yahweh, Jehovah, removes some of his believers, you know them as the Jaredites, and at a future point, Abram, for his own purposes. A good note for us to understand. So when we come back to Ether, and we see in chapter 1, and we read of they should be scattered, and the people were scattered, that the languages then become confounded because of the mixture or the scattering of the people. Now, notice in verse 33, it mentions Jared and that he has a unique brother. The book of Ether employs the phrase the brother of Jared as a type for Jesus Christ. The exclusion of the name draws attention to the fact that Jared was not left alone, but had a very special brother who intervened in his and his family's behalf. It should not be surprising that the brother of Jared then could be a type of Jesus Christ, as all of the God's prophets typifying of Jesus Christ are. So fun to read and to note some of these things. Notice, as he cries unto the Lord, and you might want to underline this, starting here in verse 34. He cried unto the Lord. 36, cried again to the Lord. 37, cry unto the Lord. Okay? Because of his crying unto the Lord, his intervening between the Lord and Jared and his families, okay, this phrase repeats itself. And then at the very end, he says, I am going to have compassion upon you because, notice, because, verse 43, last line, because this long time you have cried unto me. I wonder what we might avail with the Lord's help if we cried unto the Lord as the brother of Jared did. Now, he does gain the Lord's word through the inquiring that he is going to, verse 38, twice drive us out of the land. See the word drive here? Now, interesting note that Jared's phrase, drive us out of the land, is like the language describing Adam and Eve being driven from the Garden of Eden, or the expression of Cain when he was driven from the face of the Lord. The Hebrew word here being used is garash, which means to drive out, cast out, separate, divorce, or expel. But sometimes it just suggests that it is done very forcibly or violent expulsion. So they are being taken violently, forced, a separation, cast out from the people at the Tower of Babel. Notice, as they have been told that that is the case, they will then go forth, verse 41, to gather together flocks of every kind, seeds of every kind, so that they might be preserved. Notice the word seed, much like 1 Nephi 8:1, as Lehi and his family gathered seeds of the earth, it also denotes their own efforts in gathering their individual family seed that they might be preserved. So you get this idea of seeds in 41 and 43 being gathered, as well as the seed or the family of Jared and his friends and family. Okay, moving to chapter 2. In your heading, it states, I would be sure to underline, here's one of Moroni's key points, is that if you live in a choice land, then you must serve Christ or be swept off. So as we look at this, verse 1 states that they are being driven at least northward here from the valley that was Nimrod, being called after the mighty hunter. And with their flocks, with their fowls, with their fish, and with their bees. Here's Deseret. We'll look at that in a minute. And the seeds of every kind, they are going to leave. Now, a note here concerning Nimrod. Okay. Nimrod is the Hebrew word to rebel. Okay. So interesting that he is the author of the Tower of Babel. He was called Mighty Hunter. Both the Genesis account and the Jaredite account make him or name him the mighty hunter because he actually stole the garment of God and he deceived the creatures with it. This from Brother Nibley out of an incredible article I would tell you that you probably should read called Man's Dominion out of the New Era, actually stated, Ham's son Nimrod, the mighty hunter who boasted that no animal could escape his bow, turned that bow against men as well as animals, and so subdued all things to his will, ruling all the earth with his inspired violence. He was the mortal enemy and rival of Abraham. And whereas Abraham gave Adam's blessing to the beast, Nimrod ordered thousands of cattle brought and sacrificed them. This he was able to do through possession of the garment of the priesthood that had once belonged to Adam and that Ham had stolen from Noah. Seeing him in this garment, all creatures willingly came and submitted to him, mistaking the dominion of Cain for the dominion of Adam. So great insight here, and you can read more about that out of the New Era. Okay, mentioned here that I was going to talk about Deseret, which in their language meant honey bee. The reason I bring this up is because we see this word in the church everywhere, right? Deseret in the Egyptian is spelled D-S-R-T. It doesn't have any vowels. So D-S-R-T, and means the one who has the right to the throne. Ooh, fascinating definition. The honeybee is even on the doorknobs of the Salt Lake City temple. And that's fascinating that its meaning then carries into the Salt Lake City temple, where one learns how to obtain a throne. Note this from Elder Orson Pratt. Do you suppose that we shall get up out of our grave, male and female, and that we shall not have the same kind of affections and endearments and enjoyments that we have here? The same pure feelings of love and existence in the bosom of the male and female in this world will exist with sevenfold intensity in the next world. Governed by the law of God, there will be no corruption nor infringements upon one another's rights. Will not have man have his own family? Yes, he will also have his own mansion and farm, his own sons and daughters, and what else? Why, the fact is, man will continue to multiply and fill up this creation, insomuch as it is not filled up by the resurrected saints after it is made new. And what will he do when this is filled up? Why, he will make more worlds and swarm out, notice, like bees from the old hive, and prepare new locations. And when a farmer has cultivated his farm and raised numerous children so that the space is beginning to be too strict for them, he will say, "My sons, yonder is plenty of matter. Go and organize a world and people it. And you shall have laws to govern you, and you shall understand and comprehend through your experience the same things we know. And thus it will be one eternal round and one continual increase, and the government will be placed upon those that are crowned as kings and priests in the presence of God." Fascinating that he uses the honeybee and its hive that becomes full, and then we swarm out into a new space and begin to fill it there, much like God has. So the honeybee comes becomes the great symbol of God the Father. We already know that Jesus Christ is that of a serpent, and the Holy Ghost is that of a dove. So each of the Godhead having an interesting animal figure associated to them. So fun stuff. Notice that as they leave the valley of Nimrod, that they are led by a cloud. Verse 4, verse 5, I would be sure that you underline the cloud. We know that ancient Israel was led by the presence cloud, or known as the Shekinah. You can look that up in your Bible dictionary. And we have reference to it for its definition in Doctrine and Covenants 84, verse 5. Sometimes we miss that as they travel, having not reached the great ocean yet, that they build barges as they come to different bodies of water. See, that's interesting, that they are being prepared for their great crossing of the ocean later to come, down in verse 16, by already building little barges to cross these waters, thus good practice. The Lord just is incredible in his preparation of his children for things to come. And note, it was said, early church magazine, it is evident that they first traveled northward, but whether they then turn east or west is not so apparent, though the general idea is that they turn eastward and then cross Central Asia, where they then will make their oceanic travel around through the Pacific rather than that of the Atlantic. Note, the Lord will help and prepare for them to get to a land of promise. Now, be sure for a moment that you understand that this land of promise in verse 7, which is choice above all other lands, is not just the United States. We have numerous prophets and apostles who have stated that the Book of Mormon informs us that the whole of the Americas, North, Central, and South America, is the choice promised land. So be sure you're aware of that here in this. And as they travel, let's look here for a minute to the land of promise. Notice 9, land of promise. 10, land which is choice above all the other lands. Verse 12, this choice land. So underline each of those in those verses, that they are going to have to be given a condition. It is this. Darken, if you will. So I've double darkened in yellow and underlined and emphasized that they were to serve him, the true and only God, upon this land, or they should be swept off when the fullness of his wrath should come upon them. Fullness of his wrath meaning he will not take into account any other worship upon this land. He's had it with other lands. This is the land in which will serve him, or, verse 9, they shall be swept off when the fullness of his wrath comes. But, notice, they will serve God, or shall be swept off when the fullness of iniquity is reached. Then they will be swept off. So over and over and over it tells them, serve God or be swept off. Okay? And we would add, who is that God? Well, verse 12, serve the God of the land who is Jesus Christ. Now, fascinating that Moroni wants to make this such an important item that he makes this commentary. We probably should be aware of for our day then that those who have lived on promised lands, okay, and not served God have been swept off. We can see the history of that. First Presidency has declared, serve Jesus Christ or be swept off. America will be saved only as we learn and live His divine works. Brother Nibley has said, compared with other continents, this one has no history, no surviving culture, though far and wide civilizations whose identities remain a mystery have left their ruins and their scattered descendants. Elder Royden G. Derrick, the history of this people of ancient America recorded in the Book of Mormon teaches that civilizations are built on moral foundations, that when people are morally strong, they will do well, that when they are morally weak, they suffer. It teaches us that freedom cannot outlive morality and that freedom is not free. It must be earned. And last of all, prophet and president of the church, Joseph Fielding Smith. When we become ripe in iniquity, then the Lord will come. I get annoyed sometimes at some who, when speaking, say that the Lord will come when all become righteous enough to receive Him. The Lord is not going to wait for us to get righteous. You feel that spiritual spanking? When He gets ready to come, He is going to come. When the cup of iniquity is full, and if we are not righteous, then it will be just too bad for us. For we will be classed among the ungodly, and we will be as stubble to be swept off the face of the earth. So, noting that others have lived on these promised lands before and have been destroyed, it's fascinating to note the pattern then of these 7 groups of people and what actually brought them to be ripe in iniquity. I gave you a bigger slide so you could actually see it here. Here is the fullness of iniquity and the 7 groups that actually lived on promised lands and were wiped off. They were swept off by God because of this very principle. So note then, starting with ancient Israel, we know that through the Old Testament, they were given a land of promise, that Moses and Joshua led them into the promised land, and yet they were warned. In Deuteronomy 8, 19 and 20, I would be sure to do this and get these 7 in and get these scriptures underlined. It told them if they do forget God and begin to worship and serve other gods, we know that as idolatry, then He would certainly destroy them as He had the nations who had lived in their promised lands before them. Okay? The Canaanites lived on promised lands, were absolutely fascinated with the occult, with evil itself. And so in Deuteronomy 18, 9 through 12, Israel is warned. You do as the Canaanites and I'll wipe you out, which was get involved in sorcery and witchcraft and so forth. Okay, we have Sodom and Gomorrah, who lived at the bottom of the Red Sea in Promised Land area, and yet we're told in New Testament times, in Jude 1, 7 and 8, that they succumbed to the lust of having strange flesh, or we would call that today homosexuality. The Ammonites were actually a group of people in the Book of Mormon that we've looked at in Alma 10 who didn't want any righteous influence around them. So they cast out all the righteous. Well, that's really a dumb thing to do, because then you only have the wicked left. And so God literally demolished Ammoniah. In fact, they're the only group out of these 8 excuse me, that you see were actually eliminated all. They were annihilated. Next, we have the Nephites, who we're going to see here in a couple of lessons away. They lose all civilization. They become brutal and care nothing about anyone or anything else, and are destroyed because of it. We'll have the Jaredites, as we are looking at their record today and for the next 2 lessons, who got involved in secret combinations, which brought their civilization down, to have the Lord wipe them out. And last of all, the last people to be swept off of a promised land was those people in Noah's day. I guess you could say they didn't get swept off. They got the mop instead of the broom. They got drowned in the great waters of the flood. And so they got mopped up, and we see because they were filled twice in these verses, twice it says they were filled with violence, and the God of peace will not tolerate a people that become violent. So looking at our day and the pattern that this gives as people that live in a promised land, I would ask you, how are we doing in these 7 areas? Not real hot. Okay? I think we would say we are in trouble because we have all 7 of those things as current problems of the day. And so you can see why the prophet might say, we're not going to wait till you get righteous. If you become too involved in this, you'll get the blowtorch, I guess, is ours, right? You'll get burned at the second coming of Christ. So some interesting insights that Moroni wants to be sure that you understand. Now, as we come back to scriptures, note here 2 quotes from apostles. There is only one way. The infallible cure is simply righteousness, obedience, godliness, honor, and integrity. There is no other cure. Mountains of arms and ammunitions will not guarantee safety, for our enemies can also build fortifications and missiles and bomb shelters. Interesting. The only power strong enough to withstand the fullness of iniquity is the fullness of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Magnificent insight from seers. Now, we do have, in verse 13, we do have the Jaredites traveling, and notice they call one of the places they stay Moriankamer. Now, that's interesting. Okay. We know that Moriankamer is actually the name of the brother of Jared, his name being Mahonri Moriankamer. But we only know that because of modern day revelation through the prophet Joseph Smith. When Joseph, walking down the street, was asked by Reynolds Cahoon to come in the house and give his new baby a name and a blessing. Well, Joseph does give him his blessing, but he names that boy Mahonri Moriankamer. When he's finished, he turns around and says, "Oh, and by the way, just so that you know, I gave him the name of the brother of Jared." So that's the only reason we know Mahonri Moriankamer's name is the brother of Jared, and that would make sense because naming places was done usually after naming after a person. So we shouldn't be surprised that they called this place Moriankamer after the brother of Jared, or Mahonri. It's also interesting to note that if you analyze the name Mahonri Moriankamer, if correct, it then would mean one who stands up for God, that is, one who speaks for or represents the Lord. So the whole name, Mahonri Moriankamer, would be the master of the mystery of Jehovah, who stands up for the Lord. So fascinating name breakdown to help us see truly who Mahonri Moriankamer was. Well, being led by this cloud, here's the word cloud again in verse 14. You might want to be sure that you underline that. We've talked about it. That when they reach the end of their 4-year journey, it states that for the space of 3 hours, that the brother of Jared gets chastened by the Lord because he did not call upon the name of God. Okay. Elder Holland says it is difficult to imagine what a 3-hour rebuke from the Lord might be like, but the brother of Jared endured it. With immediate repentance and prayer, this prophet again sought guidance for the journey they had been assigned and those who were to pursue it. God accepted his repentance and lovingly gave further direction for their critical mission. Now, that further direction came in verse 16 by the Lord to go to work and to build after the manner of barges which ye have hitherto built. So once again, we go back to that verse earlier where he's prepped them through their journeys for this undertaking. And I wonder how many times we don't see the Lord's actual hand in our lives prepping us for the big events in our lives to come. It's a great insight. So they begin to build barges, but notice they were small, they were light upon the water, even like the lightness of the fowl upon the water. In other words, they would ride on top. They were built after the manner that they were exceedingly tight. Notice, not shaped like a dish, but tight in that they were watertight like unto a dish. Okay? Notice, tight like unto a dish, tight like unto a dish, tight like unto a dish, tight like unto the dish. So, and the length of a tree, and they're supposed to have a door in the side. Now, understanding that they're going to be so tight because the water can't get in, that's also going to prevent air to get in or light. And so notice the brother of Jared has some concerns when he says, verse 19, Lord, in them there's no light, whether we should also steer. And also we shall perish, for in them we cannot breathe. Save it be air which is in them, therefore we're dead. It's interesting that these three problems seem to be the same difficulties that you and I struggle with in life. Note, the first one is, there is no light. It's interesting that, like the brother of Jared, each of us face challenges in life. At times, we may plead with the Lord, will you have me go through this life without light to understand why things are the way they are? His answer to us might be the same question. He asked the brother of Jared, well, what would you like me to do about it? To put light into your spiritual vessels? And so the one that does not the other two are given automatically. It's this one that we're going to struggle with, is how much light do you want? Where are you going to obtain your light and knowledge from? That depends completely on us. And so I would be sure that you put down, our difficulty in this life is where and how to obtain proper light. Doctrine and Covenants 50 verse 24. Where the other two problems are assisted by the Lord. Notice, there is no way to steer them. And he says, Ether 6 through 8, you don't worry about that. I will cause a wind that will blow you right to the exact space and place that I want you to be in. Which is fascinating because we know that they have 8 boats. They're not linked together. Okay? And yet, if you set them afloat, you tell me that all 8 boats in a year's time are going to end up exactly in the same place by just floating in the ocean. Unbelievable. And hence, a great idea for you and I, that the Lord has a wind to blow us exactly to where he wants us as well. Interesting, in your footnote in Ezekiel 37:9, it tells you that the word wind also is the Hebrew word for spirit. And we have his spirit that will direct us exactly where he wants us to be. Well, not only that, but he says, you don't worry about the air either. And we know that he gives him the solution to the air in the following verses. But we don't have to worry about our air either. We actually have our air or our breath lent to us by our God, according to King Mosiah, or King Benjamin in Mosiah. So notice he takes care of the air, he takes care of the steering, but where are you going to get your light and how much do you want? Seems to be the great question for us today. Well, as we continue down, notice he says, well, what will ye that I should do that you should have light in your vessels? For you can't have a window because they'll be dashed out. You can't have fire. You'll set your boat on a flame. Notice that considering that his people were already constructing barges after the manner of Noah's Ark, Ether 6 verse 7. Is it possible that the brother of Jared knew something of the stones which illuminated Noah's vessel when thinking of a potential source of light? While stones that emit light may seem like an absurdity to some modern readers, legends of their existence and importance were widely spread through the ancient world. I can just see the brother of Jared eating his Cheerios one morning, reading his scriptures on what Noah did about his boat problems, and coming to understand that he had a stone in his boat that shone light. It's right out of this footnote in Genesis 6:16. So you might ask yourself, what kind of light did Noah have on his ark? Well, that's an easy answer then. Flood lights. Oh, that's terrible. Sorry. Okay, notice then, the Jaredites began their journey to place stones that have been blessed by the Lord's touch in their ships so that they might have light. Of course, the Lord could have provided a light for the travelers by many other methods, but he used the stones that the brother of Jared brought to him. These stones may serve to remind those in the barges and us as well that all light comes from the Savior, that he is the rock of our salvation. And realize then that Noah and the brother of Jared are not separated by very many years at all. Okay, so some good insight as we look through this chapter. Let's jump now to chapter 3, where the brother of Jared is going to have his experience. Be sure you underlined all of your heading, and we'll jump in verse 1. Now the number of the vessels that they had here was 8. Okay. He will go forth to Mount Shalem because of exceeding height. You see, Moroni is trying to give you some insights here. And he did molten out of rock 16 small stones. That's 2 for each boat then. And they were white, clear, even as transparent glass. And he carried them in his hands upon the top of the mountain. Now, if you read it carefully, you'll see that Mount Shalem acted as a temple for the brother of Jared. Notice, it is an exceedingly high mountain. In fact, if we come down here, notice the definition of Shalem. Okay? In Hebrew, it's SLM, an Arabic word also for Muslim or Islam, right? SLM, signifying peace with God. But it originally meant safe or security, especially in Shalem. Okay? A covenant relationship. In particular, Shalem has reference to the peace offering of the law of sacrifice mentioned in Leviticus chapter 3. And thereby has a relationship to the meaning of the at 1 month, the peace offering. It's still the word in Arabic, right, meaning ladder. And so the symbol for the process of exaltation, or the steps that one might take to get to heaven, found in the temple, is exactly the same thing that the brother of Jacob, is who I'm trying to think of, Jacob's ladder in Genesis 28, actually found out that the rungs on the ladder are the steps one must take to become as God. And so we have the same thing in this mountain's name. We see that a person then here decides that he needs further light and knowledge from God, and that he will actually then move that direction. In doing so, he sees the finger or hand of the Lord come through the veil. That sounds familiar. He will fall down before the Lord in fear. Having this perfect knowledge of God, he could not be kept from within the veil. He will see the Lord, use the name of God, and be shown the works of creation. All of those things mentioned there are temple experiences of today. So may want to note that. Notice we might also ask ourselves, wait a minute, the rocks were white, clear, and transparent as glass. Interesting that the 16 stones were described as such. Although we do not know the exact date of the Tower of Babel, it is commonly placed in about 2200 BC. We may wonder how early the art of glass work was actually known. William S. Ellis, in the National Geographic magazine for December of 1993, reports that the most reliable research places the invention of glass sometime in the 3rd millennium before the birth of Christ in Mesopotamia or present-day Iraq and Syria, and further, the earliest known glass makers worked in Mesopotamia as far back as 2500 BC, crafting beads and other small objects to imitate precious stones. Mesopotamia is the general area, and the date 2500 BC indicating that glass may have been made as much as 300 years before the Tower of Babel, and thus substantiates the story of the brother of Jared. We do not need historical proof to confirm the record, yet it is interesting to see a bit of secular confirmation that it could have happened as the record said that it did. Okay, knowing then that this is a temple experience, let me suggest to you, notice as we come down that the Lord is willing then to stretch forth his hand in verse 6 and touch the stones, but note, one by one he uses his finger. And once again we see incredible insight, even for rocks, that they get the individual touch and attention of the great God of creation himself. Just as we should realize how much he individually cares and loves us. Well, as we come down, it states here in verse 13, when he had said these words, behold, the Lord showed himself unto him and said, great line, because thou knowest these things, you are redeemed from the fall, therefore you are brought back into the presence of God, therefore I show myself unto you. So what is it that the brother of Jared actually knew so that he was redeemed and could be in the presence of God? I find that fascinating that if you go through this chapter, that there are 8 things specifically mentioned that the brother of Jared had come to know for sure, and that with knowledge we can unlock the presence of God. Elder Holland has stated, the Book of Mormon is predicated on the willingness of men and women to rend the veil of unbelief in order to behold the revelations and the revelation of God. the brother of Jared may not have had great belief in himself, but his belief in God was unprecedented, in that there is hope for us all. His faith was without doubt or limit. Once and for all, it was declared that ordinary people with ordinary challenges could rend the veil of unbelief and enter the realms of eternity. Now, fascinating that as we come down, as he shows himself to the brother of Jared, notice he states, verse 15, "Never have I showed myself unto man, whom I have created, for never has man believed in me as thou hast, brother of Jared, seeing thou that you have been created after mine own image. And even all men were created in the beginning after mine own image." Now, a note here. If he has never shown himself unto man, okay, then what about all those people that we declare saw God in the beginning, like Adam, like Enoch, like Noah? Well, here's Elder Holland that might help us with this potentially confusing verse. In fact, Elder Holland stated, the potential for confusion here comes from the realization that many and perhaps all of the major prophets living prior to the brother of Jared has seen God. How then do we account for the Lord's declaration? Christ was saying to the brother of Jared, "Never have I showed myself unto man in this manner, without my volition, driven solely by the faith of the beholder." As a rule, prophets are invited into the presence of the Lord. They are bidden to enter his presence by him, and only with his sanction. The brother of Jared, on the other hand, seems to have thrust himself through the veil, not as an unwelcome guest, but perhaps technically as an uninvited one. So there helps us understand and resolve the problem that we might have in verse 15. Now, verse 16 states, when Christ shows himself to him, he says, "This body which you now behold is the body of my spirit. And man have I created after the body of my spirit. And even as I appear unto thee to be in the spirit, will I appear unto my people in the flesh." Now, wait a minute. Does a spirit have a body? Yes. Is it in likeness of the same body that we have here? Yes. Verse 17, "So Jesus showed himself unto this man in the spirit, even after the manner and in the likeness of the same body, even as he showed himself unto the Nephites." Okay? We understand that principle when we look up Doctrine and Covenants 131, 7 and 8, and we know that spirits have bodies, though the matter that makes up those bodies is more refined. In fact, in section 77, verse 2, in fact, I'm going to take you there, we see that in verse 2, we are told that the spirit body is in the likeness of that which is temporal, and that which is temporal is in the likeness of that spirit, down right to the very organs that we have. Notice all these quotes that I have by prophets and apostles concerning man's spirit being in likeness to that which is in the flesh. Man's spirit then is an individual, a personality, And the spirit is in the likeness and the shape of the body which it inhabits. When the spirit goes out of the body, there's a person, a perfectly formed individual looking like the body which we now see with our natural eyes. Okay? The spirit, if it could be seen with mortal eyes, then would appear in bodily shape like a full-grown person with individual endowments, then it makes it a counterpart of the body in which it tabernacles. It has eyes, ears, nose, mouth, digits, okay, and so forth, after the same that we have here. So there's a good insight as we look at the Lord's declaration to the brother of Jared of him seeing his spirit body, which appears exactly like he will come in the flesh. Okay, but he knew, and he forced the Lord to show him because of the things that he knew. Having this perfect knowledge, then the Lord could not keep the brother of Jared from within the veil. Okay, so 19 and 20 are key verses as well. And he will see and hear, verse 21. I always love to underline both of those words, see and hear, because it denotes law of witnesses too. Okay? And there are some things that cannot, by the language of man, be talked about here. For note that, behold, verse 22, when ye shall come unto me, ye shall write what you saw, brother of Jared, and shall seal them up, those things that you saw and heard, that no one can interpret them, for you shall write them in a language that that they cannot be read. Okay, we'll talk more about them in the next 2 chapters. But I'll include 2 stones. We know that the Lord can light a stone. Interesting that those stones are actually known as a Urim and a Thummim. Okay, Urim means lights. Thummim means perfections. So you get what kind of light as you look through these 2 stones? Perfect light. Okay, and we talked a lot about that back in Mosiah chapter 8. So if you need more information on seer stones, that's where I would take you. Verse 25, and when the Lord had said these words, he showed unto the brother of Jared all the inhabitants of the earth, which has been, and also all that would be. He sees the big panoramic picture from beginning to end of earth history. Okay? Much like Moses did here in Moses 1 verse 8. He showed him, verse 26, all things. Now, with that panoramic picture being shown, note as we go to the next chapter, the Lord commands then the brother of Jared to come down out of the mount. So he not just went up on top, he went in the mount. That's what Ether 6:2 says as well. So it is a temple experience. Coming out of the presence of the Lord, and he commands him to write the things which he had seen. They are forbidden to come forth unto the children of men. Note, number 1, until Christ should be lifted up upon the cross. And for this cause did King Mosiah keep them to himself, that they should not come unto the world until after Christ should show himself unto his people. Okay, a resurrection. So crucifixion and resurrection have to come first. Note, here's what we then know about the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon. The sealed portion of the Book of Mormon shall yet be translated by the gift and power of God. The words, so translated, shall be published to the world. All men everywhere will be entitled to hear them. This means that all men will have to have the faith of the brother Jared, a state that will not prevail until the millennial day, after the destruction of the wicked, when the Lord Jesus reigns personally upon the earth. Elder McConkie continuing. Of course, then, is clear it is incumbent upon us to believe the Book of Mormon, to rivet its truths in our soul, to accept them without reservation, to ponder their deep and hidden meanings, and to live in harmony with them. Then, and then only, shall we receive the additional words spoken by Jesus to the Nephites and the added teachings had by the Jaredites. The sealed portion, according to then Elder McConkie, the 7 specific things contained in it have to be a premortal life account, the creation of all things account, its fall, the atonement, and the second coming of Christ. The temple in ordinances in their fullness, the ministry and mission of translated beings, life in the spirit world, both in paradise and in hell, and the kingdom of glory to be inhabited by resurrected beings, must be contained in the sealed portion. Elder McConkie continuing says, but sadly the book is sealed. Its contents are being kept from men in this day. Indeed, it is not even now in the possession of mortals. It was returned by Joseph Smith to Moroni, its divinely appointed custodian. Nor did even Joseph Smith either read or translate it. We know of no one among mortals since Mormon and Moroni who have known its contents. It was known among the Nephites during the nearly 200 year of their golden era, but for the present the book is kept from us. Only the portion upon which no seal was placed has been translated. Why are these plates of Mormon sealed? The answer is obvious. They contain spiritual truths beyond our present ability to receive. Milk must precede meat, and whenever men are offered more of the mysteries of the kingdom than they are prepared to receive, it affects them adversely. So what do we have to do? Well, according to scriptures, here's the 5 requirements then to obtain the sealed portion. They'll be listed here in verses 4 through 8 below. Note, Christ must have already been crucified, verse 1. We must repent of our iniquity and become clean before the Lord, verse 6. We must exercise faith in the Lord, even as the brother of Jared, verse 7. We must become sanctified in the Lord, verse 7. And we must not contend against the word of the Lord, or we will be accursed and not be shown any greater things, verse 8. So this chapter concludes with, note, verse 11, 12, he that believeth these things which I have spoken, him will I visit with the manifestations of my spirit, and he shall know and bear record. For behold, my spirit, he shall know that these things, Book of Mormon, are true. For it persuadeth men to do good. And whatsoever thing persuadeth men to do good is of me, and for good cometh of none save it be of me. I am the same leadeth men to all good. Of course, the great discourse on that coming here in a couple of lessons in Moroni 7, 12, and 13. So, the encouragement and command is Gentiles, verse 13, come unto Christ. House of Israel, come unto Christ. ye ends of the world, come unto Christ. Believe in his gospel. Be baptized in his name. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. So when you shall rend this veil of unbelief, verse 15, which doth cause you to remain in your awful state of wickedness and hard-heartedness and blindness of mind, then shall you have great and marvelous things which have been hidden from the foundation of the world for you. Okay? So it's paramount that we receive the Book of Mormon. Okay? It is the key to coming unto Christ for the ends of the earth, for the house of Israel, and for the Gentiles. And with that record, then we can not only come to Christ, but we can begin to, or commence to do the work of the Father, which is to gather all who will come to Christ. 3 Nephi 21, 1 and 2. So we end in chapter 5, where Moroni says, and by the way, second chapter in the original Book of Mormon, I told you these things which I have sealed up. Therefore, touch not, in order that you might translate. For the things is forbidden you, except by and by it shall be wisdom in God. Now, I've never had the opportunity to touch or to translate. So who is the you here? You has to be the prophet Joseph Smith. So Moroni speaks openly to the prophet Joseph Smith, knowing not only his role as a prophet and his commission with Moroni's plates in the last days. He understands who Joseph is and warns him not to touch or to translate the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon. He continues, behold, ye may be privileged that ye may show the plates unto those. So Joseph, you may have those who can assist you in this work. Even 3. Better darken this. Wherefore you shall know of a surety that these things are true. And in the mouths of 3 witnesses shall these things be established. And the testimony of 3 of this work, in which shall be shown forth the power of God. Now, you may want to be sure that you know that these are the very verses that led Joseph to ask the Lord about 3 witnesses, of which will be obtained, that all may stand as a testimony against the world in the last day, having not only Joseph's, not only Moroni's, but also 3 witnesses on top of that, and we would add, and a few other on top of that, even 8 more, that the Book of Mormon is true. And he closes, when ye shall see me, ye shall stand before God at that last day. In other words, Moroni will be there waiting to ask you what you've done with the book that cost him not only his life, but his father's life as well. Well, some great chapters here on these 24 plates of the Book of Ether. I'm grateful for your attendance. I would encourage you to look forward to next week as we now have Jaredite barges ready, and we'll take our exodus from the old world and successfully a year later arrive in the new world with them, and there watch their development, but also their ultimate destruction. May we be aware of the witnesses that we have, that we might build our lives and our civilization on the God of this land, or be swept or mopped or burned off. Grateful for the great testimony of this book. I attest that it is true, and I encourage you to read and study it more. I don't know if that's possibly something that we can even do enough as we prepare for the coming of the second coming of the Lord. Hope you have His Spirit, and hope you enjoy the things we've talked about here, and pray you'll visit another lesson with me next time. Till then.